So one of our favorite places as a family is Canada's Wonderland near Toronto. I'm just curious, anyone ever been there? Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, we love that. And by family, I mean myself and my two girls. We love the thrill of roller coaster rides. My wife, not so much. She's the I'll hold the backpacks person, if you know what I mean, right? And we all need one of those individuals when we go to theme parks. That's true. Now, this year, Wonderland is coming out with a new ride that's going to launch this spring, and it's called the Yukon Striker. So check this out. This ride has more than 1,100 meters of crazy track, and it has a 90-degree, 75-meter drop. And as you see on this video coming up here, I'm going to take you right up to that, yes, you heard me correctly, 90-degree, 75-meter drop. And it just kind of pauses you there for a minute. How many of you are throwing up right now? You know what I'm saying? And then as you go down, you actually go through an underwater tunnel, and it keeps going. Now, this ride is going to claim several world records. It'll be the longest, tallest, and fastest dive roller coaster at 130 kilometers per hour. And I would say another record is that it's going to make the most people die, if you know what I'm saying. Like, it's insane. Now, when I showed this to my girls, they were all like, they literally freaked out. They were all like, Dad, we got to go to this. This is going to be so awesome. This will be great. And on the outside, I'm all in, right? But in the inside, I'm kind of like, all right, Lord, if it's my time to die, let it be on Yukon Striker, all right? I'm doing my dad duty here. You know what I'm saying? Now, Marla, her answer is simple. Nope, not, never, couldn't pay me enough. I will hold the backpacks. Thank you very much. Now, I'm just curious. You've seen a little bit of this ride. You've heard a little bit about it. How many of you here today and watching online or watching from Terwilliger would say, I'd go on that ride? Okay, yes, so you're with me. How many of you would say, no, thank you, guy, I'm going to hold the backpacks? There we go. You see, two different responses here, right? One's impulsive, one's tentative, one's engaging, one's observing, one's experience, and you would say one's valuing your life, if you know what I mean. Easter celebrates Jesus is risen. He is alive. He's no longer dead. He came out of the tomb, and death couldn't hold him back. And I want to take you to two different responses to the resurrection of Jesus, which I believe reflect most of us here today. Because the reality is, we have to make a decision when it comes to this event. And that decision really determines how we experience and live life. So I want to set the scene a little bit for you. Jesus came and convinced a group of people that he was God's son, that he was the Messiah many had been waiting for, that he would save the Jewish people from the Roman oppression, that their lives were going to get better. And a whole bunch of people bought in. Many had their hopes on this new regime led by Jesus that would eventually create their desired freedom. But what happened messed them up. Somehow their hope was dashed. The religious leaders at that time were able to stir up enough tension to get the Romans to sentence Jesus to death. And so Jesus was crucified, as was customary for the death sentence back in those days. He died and he was put in a tomb. And many were feeling duped, feeling betrayed, even fooled by, oh man, I can't believe I bought into this. There was anger, there was sadness, there was confusion, there was this feeling of, so now what? Ever been there? You're doing life and all of a sudden cancer happens and you're like, so now what? Or you bought the house, but then you lost your job and you're like, so now what? Your dreams were falling into place with that one person and they left you. So now what? It's even like the bombings we read about this morning in Sri Lanka at those Catholic churches. Sad, let's pray for our brothers and sisters across the world, but so now what? It's exactly what those closest to Jesus were thinking, feeling, and trying to work through. Jesus is dead. I gave him my life. And guys like Peter and John, they were disciples. They quit their jobs to follow Jesus. They left everything they knew, and now it seemed to be useless, pointless. It seemed like a dead end. They were still in shock, and they gathered with some of the other disciples in a house. They were afraid, they were confused, and they were asking, so now what? And I want to take you to what John, the disciple, wrote. He said this: early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running, which would have been weird, right? Tombs don't get rolled, like the stones don't get rolled away. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, AKA, John just refers himself to that. He's like, I'm Jesus's BFF and everyone's gonna know this. So the one Jesus loved, and said, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb and we don't know where they have put him. So you can imagine Peter and John just thinking, what? The tomb is open, man, like this is going from bad to worse. Mary has just told us that Jesus' body has been stolen. This is crazy. Like, so now what? We read on. John writes this: so Peter and the other disciple, meaning himself, started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. I kind of love that line. It's like, in all of history, forever and ever, John wanted us to know that he was more fit than Peter. It's like, I did P90X. I can run way faster. I'm going to kill this guy, and everyone's going to know this. He, meaning John, bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter, who was behind him, remember the slow runner? Yeah, that's him. He was behind me. Arrived and went into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the burial cloth that had been around Jesus' head. The cloth was folded up by itself, lying in its place, separate from the linen. So upon the news, Peter and John take off to the tomb. These two guys were two of Jesus' closest friends. They did everything with Jesus. They hung out with him, but they were opposites. They approached life differently. Now, both of them were fishermen by trade. Both knew how to live life on the open sea. And both actually left that career to follow Jesus, but their similarities stopped there. Peter he basically was an act first, think later type of guy. And we all know someone like that, right? And maybe if you're sitting here thinking, actually, Phil, I don't know someone like that, chances are it's you, okay? Just a hint, all right? Peter, he was impulsive. He was passionate. He did what first came to mind. And the Bible tells us that's why when Jesus was walking on the water towards the disciples, he asked Jesus, can I walk on the water? It's why Peter cut off the ear of a servant from a soldier when Jesus was being arrested. It's why Peter denied Jesus not just once, but 3 times. Peter's the guy who would jump on the roller coaster, no holds barred. Now, John, on the other hand, he was a little bit more contemplative. He was more of a think it through before going at it type of guy. And we know that he was the loyal friend Jesus needed. And we see him consistently standing up for Jesus, like he always had Jesus's back. Like there was this one time when Jesus went into this small town. And this town didn't like Jesus, didn't want him there. And so they asked Jesus to leave and to never come back. And as they're leaving, John looks at Jesus and says, Jesus, should I call down fire from heaven to burn this town up? In other words, I've got their back. I want to show them that I got your back. I want to show them that they can't mess with you. Now, John was also the only disciple who was at the cross when Jesus died. And it was in that moment where Jesus even looked at him as he was dying and asked John to take care of his mother. It's like he knew he could just trust John in this. As I said already, John calls himself the one that Jesus loved, not once, but 5 times throughout his writings. And I would say this, John would definitely be the guy holding the backpacks at Wonderland. So that explains why these two responded so differently when they reached the tomb. John looked into the empty tomb, but he didn't go in. Peter didn't hesitate to walk right into the tomb. Like, he walks in, he's handling the burial cloths, he's looking around, he's making his decision on what happened. John stood from the outside looking in. He was hesitant. And remember, this is John himself writing what we're reading here. And he's saying, I didn't go in. I looked, but I didn't go in. I was trying to make sense of the events on the outside looking in. But you know what? Some things don't make sense from the outside looking in. And some of us are like Peter here today, and some of us are like John. And let me say this, both are okay places to be in. Both spell out different responses to an event that took place. And maybe you're here and you're saying, my whole life I've been looking for meaning. My whole life I've been searching for purpose. My whole life I'm trying to understand God. My whole life I'm wondering, did Jesus really rise from the dead? You're on the outside looking in. You're looking at the empty tomb and you're saying, okay, this seems kind of crazy, man. And so you're hesitant to believe someone rose from the dead. Prove it, man. And let me say, it's okay to be like that. Life's kind of like that, right? Like if someone comes up to us and says, I can dunk a ball on a net, we're kind of, okay, cool, prove it. Or if someone says, I can play Sweet Child of Mine on the guitar, we're like, nice, prove it, show me. If someone says they can solve a Rubik's Cube in under 30 seconds, we're like, very nice, prove it. What if I told you this morning that I can make you do something you don't want to do? You'd probably sit back and say, yeah, right, Phil, prove it, right? Okay, so check this out. I'm going to try this. Are you ready? So what I'm going to ask you to do right now is every single one of you, if you can just lift your right foot off of the ground, all right? Just lift your right foot off the ground. And some of you are thinking, I've already won. You know, that's not the point here, okay? Just work with me, please. Lift your right foot off the ground, and as it's off the ground, be careful of your personal space and start making a clockwise circle with your right foot, okay? And as you're doing this, I'm going to ask you now to raise your right hand and make the number 6 in the air as your foot is going. I made your foot change directions, didn't I? You didn't want to, but I made you do it, right? You see, there's nothing you can do to stop this from happening. It will always happen. And let me just say this, you can stop playing with your feet now. If you want to try this, do it this afternoon, all right? That's cool. But maybe you're standing at the open tomb. You're not going in and you're saying, prove it. Prove it that Jesus rose from the dead. I mean, Easter is Jesus's big proof. It's literally what faith in him hinges on. And when Jesus was on this earth, he talked about rising from the dead lots. And if he didn't actually rise, Paul, who wrote a lot of the New Testament, said it best in this way. If there's no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. Yeah, okay, so billions of people are celebrating the fact that Jesus is alive over this weekend. But did it really happen? Well, let's look into that for a moment and start with what we know. Jesus is one of the most documented figures in history. Outside of the Bible, which contain 4 of the deepest, most detailed biographical accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it's the first 4 books of the New Testament, we also see Jesus appear in writings of individuals who didn't ascribe to the Christian faith. Guys like Thales, who was a first century Greek writer. Pliny the Younger wrote about Jesus. Roman historians Tacitus and Suetonius wrote about Jesus and his life. And there was this Jewish historian called Flavius Josephus who chronicles the life of Jesus. Now, I'm just saying that's a really good name for your next child, all right? Flavius. He'll never be made fun of. Trust me, I know that, okay? So we know that Jesus existed because we have proof there. And we also know that after the crucifixion, 3 days later, his followers told people that he had risen from the dead, that they had seen him, that they had talked to him, that they had touched him. And this wasn't just a few people, this was many, numbering hundreds. So what happened? Well, there are a few options, right? One could be that the disciples stole the body. This was to make sure that they didn't look stupid for following someone who claimed he would rise from the dead. But if you read the account of Jesus, the tomb was guarded by a Roman guard, which would have upwards to 16 armed men. Kind of hard to steal a body in that atmosphere. Also, we know this, that 11 of the 12 disciples died for their story, died for claiming to be eyewitnesses to the risen Jesus. People don't have a tendency to die for what they know is a lie. So chances are the disciples didn't steal the body. Well, then maybe the Jewish or Roman authorities stole the body. But what would their motive be, right? I mean, their biggest fear was that someone would steal the body, hence the large Roman guard around the tomb. And besides, think about this. Who ever guarded a tomb before? You know what I'm saying? They had this vested interest in making sure people didn't believe Jesus rose from the dead because of his claims that he would. And since Jesus was really a threat to everything they were about, they actually wished they had the body so they could parade it about and prove their point to everyone. Well, maybe the disciples just went to the wrong tomb on that Sunday morning. I doubt that, but maybe. Or maybe Jesus didn't really die. Like maybe he just slipped into a coma on a cross or on the cross. He died from exhaustion, or he went into this coma from pain and loss of blood. He was mostly dead, which means he was slightly alive. So much so that eventually when he was in the tomb, he just got up and walked around. See, the options aren't that convincing. In fact, I think the resurrection is easier to believe than these. And so maybe I'm saying Jesus did rise from the dead. But dead people don't rise. You're right. They don't. But that's the point. That's what rocked the mold. Dead people don't rise. N.T. Wright, he's a theologian. He's the head of the Anglican Church in England, and he wrote this. No one would have ever thought up the resurrection because nobody believes such a thing possible. He goes on, the early Christians did not invent the empty tomb and the meetings or sightings of the risen Jesus in order to explain a faith they already had. They developed the faith because a dead man rose. What's more, he said he would. They said, prove it, and he did. Now remember John. He was standing at the entrance of the empty tomb, observing the burial cloths, but he didn't go in. Peter had a different perspective. He went in, he took a closer look at the evidence that Jesus left. And I gotta say this, I love the fact that the headpiece cloth was folded. Just a side note for you parents, here's a great scripture to use to prove that Jesus wants your kids to make their bed. I'm just saying, okay? It works, it's awesome. But I love that it's folded because Jesus just gave the extra evidence that he is alive. Peter went into the tomb and discovered for himself. John stopped at the threshold and observed. He wasn't sure. And so let me take you to the next thing that happened. John writes this. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first. There he is, just digging it into Peter again, right? I want everyone to know I am the best rudder around, okay? He also went inside. He saw and believed. Finally, remember, this is John reflecting. He says, finally, meaning I stood there for too long. I stood there trying to figure it out from the outside. But when I went inside, I saw it from a new point of view. It was on the inside that John's perspective changed, and we read that he saw and believed. Now, for him, looking into the tomb from the outside represented emptiness. It filled his mind with questions. It spoke of a bleak future, of asking the question, so now what? But once inside, his perspective changed. An empty tomb represented hope. It represented a future. It represented forgiveness, life, and a next. It represented everything Jesus talked about. And for John, he saw the evidence and he believed. Jesus is alive. But it didn't happen until he stepped inside. You see, the first time he looked from the outside in with his eyes. Once inside, he looked with his heart. And friends, today, if you're standing on the outside looking in, if you're deciding whether or not to cross the threshold of believing that Jesus is alive today, can I encourage you to change your perspective, to change your view? Walk inside and see what billions of people have discovered. Walk inside and recognize that Jesus is alive. The proof is there. Jesus changes your life. The evidence is all around. Jesus provides a hope and a future. The verdict is in. Jesus is alive. How do you respond? Because our response to the resurrection of Jesus determines our response to life. And I want to read you what happened next in the life of Peter and John. And this is really for those of us who have believed already or believe that Jesus is alive. Check out what John writes. He just says this sentence. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. Here's what that tells me. They went back to their homes. Peter and John believed, and they went back home to the same situation they were in before they came to the tomb. And I want you to notice this. Their circumstance didn't change, but how they saw it changed. And the resurrection doesn't necessarily change your circumstance. It just changes how you see it. And so for those things in your life where you're asking the question, so now what? The resurrection changes how you face it. It changes how you walk through it. It changes how you deal with it. It provides hope. And if you're here thinking that this life is all there is, well, the resurrection of Jesus tells us that death has been beat and there is an eternal perspective for us all. Jesus provides hope for today, tomorrow, and eternity. And I want you to hear the story of Craig. He's a guy from our church community. And I want you to hear how he walked through a so now what scenario in his life.
I remember it was really cold and I was coming home from work and it was in the afternoon, and I remember these two people walking by the truck and they provoking me to get out, and I got out and some words were exchanged and I ended up getting stabbed in the back 3 times. I remember lying on the ground in the snow and I was bleeding quite heavily, and my breaths were very short, and I was thinking that, I think I had about 10 minutes to live in that moment. So I remember lying down in the snow, and my eyes, I could just see above the crest of the snow, and I was staring at my truck, which was still there and still running, and thinking, okay, I have 10 minutes to drive myself to the hospital. I just remember praying and thinking that, this might be the moment where I might not come back. My whole life, I wasn't a Christian. I just kind of did what society told me to do the right thing, be charitable. Yeah, and it wasn't really until university that, I met some people and they started to answer some questions that I had. And I remember one person that I met just said, God opens those doors for you and it's up to you to walk through. I took the plunge and I walked through and I went to church. Faith was just so easy in those years, and I was just never embarrassed or never hesitated to tell people about Jesus Christ. And then my trauma happened, and coming out of surgery, you would think that was the moment, to bring me back, to say, let's put God first. And of course you say those things. I went back to work and it just sort of happened again. Like I got caught in that trap of work and being a good leader and just kind of veering away from, who is Jesus Christ and what's the relationship that I have with Jesus Christ? Because I didn't stop going to church. I didn't stop hanging around with people that love Jesus. I didn't stop reading the Bible. I didn't stop going to Bible study. I didn't stop doing those things. I stopped having a relationship with Jesus Christ. My faith got to a real low point after my trauma. And, of course, you also start to question, why do those things happen? Why does God maybe, let those things happen? And then I had a good person tell me, really, it was my psychologist, and she just asked me, she said, what's your purpose? It should have just been so easy to say, God is my purpose, because it was before. And I couldn't, I would have been a big liar if I had said that. And work wasn't my purpose. And I just said, in that moment, I don't have one. I remember listening to this song by Lauren Daigle and You Say, and I remember just sitting in the parking lot waiting to go to the gym. Sorry. And I remember those words just speaking to me.
I keep fighting voices in my mind that say I'm not enough.
I just remember saying, God, just please wrap your hands around me and take me out of this dark hole. And he just said, go back to the easy. He said, go back to the simple, just come back and love me. I don't have to have a bunch of tasks to do to love Jesus. I just have to have a relationship. I just have to love him and believe that he loves me. I'm not embarrassed anymore to say, I love Jesus Christ. God has been patient. He has, again, shown me what it means to have a relationship with him. And he's waited, and he's waited, and he's just waited for that moment to just reach out to me, knowing that I'm also waiting for him to reach out to me at that perfect moment and just to say, hey, come back to me.
What if on opening day, no one rode the Yukon Striker at Wonderland? Like everyone just stood around it, watching and hoping someone would get on. It doesn't make sense, right? Because they built it so that people would ride it. Jesus rose from the dead so that you and I would believe. But not only believe, but live in full relationship with him. And friends, that changes everything. And so when looking at the empty tomb, will you walk inside and discover yourself the proof that is there, or will you spend your life observing from the outside? Let me say this. It's okay to be curious, but it's not okay to be oblivious. We all have to make a choice over the resurrection. Our whole lives, we live for something. We either believe that what is here and now is it, or there's something more when it's over. We believe we're alone in the universe, or there's a God who's on the loose. We believe that we can do as we want and act as we please, or there is a right and wrong, good and bad, truth and falsehood, and truth does exist outside of ourselves. We believe we don't need to worry about forgiveness of sin, relationship with God, or spiritual vibrancy, or we believe that a relationship with God through Jesus Christ is everything for us. And this is all determined by one thing: Easter. That Jesus is who he said he was. I am the resurrection and the life. And because of that, we can with confidence give our whole life to find life. And may that land true in your heart on this Easter Sunday. I'm going to ask you, if you can, to stand with me, please. come and sing a song that reiterates what I've been speaking about this morning. Yes. It means life for you. Whatever you're in today, a risen Jesus brings perspective, life, and hope. And maybe you're here and you're saying, I haven't crossed that threshold of belief in Christ. Well, in a moment here, I'm going to pray for you all, but in a moment, I'm going to pray specifically for you and along with you so that you have the opportunity to say, Jesus, I want to live for you. On this Easter Sunday, I see my need for you. I want to come back to you. I want to come to you and surrender all that I am to you. And I give you my heart. I give you my life. So I'm going to pray. I'm going to ask you to pray along with me. And then let me pray over all of you. So let's go to prayer. Jesus says, I'm here today. I see my need of you. And I no longer want to observe your tomb, so to speak. But I want to say, I want to do life with you in my heart. And so I give all that I am to you. I surrender all that I am to you. I give my life and I say, I want to pattern my life after yours. And I pray that you help me to do that. I thank you that you forgive. I thank you that you just put to death those things in my life that don't need to be there, and you offer me life. And so I embrace that today. I thank you that you're no longer dead on the cross, but you are alive, and we celebrate that. And I celebrate that in my own life, Jesus. And Lord, I pray for every person here, if they made the decision to follow you, I pray that on this day, a risen Jesus brings that clear perspective into their life. The circumstance might not change, but the perspective always changes when you are in the picture, God. And so I pray that over their hearts, over their minds, over their lives. And I thank you that we can look to you, a risen Jesus that we know goes with us at all times. And so I pray for every individual, for every couple, and every family represented here. I pray that over this Easter Sunday, blessing upon their lives, strength, wisdom, guidance, go before them. May they walk with you, and may they walk into the life that a risen Jesus offers. And I pray this all in your name. Amen. If you're here today and you prayed that prayer where you surrendered your life to Jesus along with me, can I ask you to text life to 555-888? We'd love to get a digital booklet in your hand that talks a little bit more about what it means to follow Jesus and just what it means to be a Christian here. And if you're here and you want one of our pastoral staff to pray with you after the service, they're going to be available down at the front right. Friends, thanks for being in church today. You were prayed for this week. Know that you are loved. Go into this week knowing that you walk with Jesus, who is alive. He is not dead. He conquered the tomb, and he walks with you to give you life. Happy Easter. Thanks for being in church this Sunday.